Are you one of the nearly 80% of people that are disengaged at work, or are one of your team members one of those people that are disengaged at work? There's different levels of disengagement, but it's important to understand. Are you feeling alive? Are you feeling free? Or are you feeling disconnected? Are you bringing energy to work? Or are you taking it away? We have all these discussions with Jeremy, and he makes us aware of the scary stats and how to apply these things and fix these things for yourself and on your team. And he talks about what makes him feel alive and what brings him happiness and how you can find that too. Hello and welcome to the Purpose Matrix. I am very excited for today's guest, Mr. Jeremy Pietrocini. Jeremy, how are you doing today?
Doing well, man. Thanks for calling me a mister. That's very, very polite of you.
Yeah, of course. So for our listeners, Jeremy and I, we've reconnected after, Jeremy, I think it was in 2020 during the COVID year, if I remember correctly. But Jeremy is an expert on leadership, people. He understands people from his experience at Gallup. So former senior executive, associate partner at Gallup. So in my prior corporate career, we worked with Jeremy specifically on leadership training, leadership development for the organization. That's how we got to know each other. And then I saw he launched his own business, Recreate Work, relatively recently. So we got connected on LinkedIn, and that we had a discussion a couple of weeks ago. That was absolutely, I think we scheduled it for an hour. We talked for 2, which happens from time to time. But, Gallup works with a lot of large organizations, Fortune 1000, Fortune 500, Fortune 150 companies, to help them understand really how they're doing. You bring in different studies, Clifton Strengths, surveys, things like that, but then also develop leadership training. And really it's about developing leadership in organizations. And Jeremy, through that process, you've learned a lot about people, including yourself. Yeah. You've done things well. You've worked on things. You've grown yourself a lot too. We talked about that. So tell us your backstory a little bit and what ultimately led to starting Recreate.
Yeah. So, you hit on it well, and many people know Gallup as the polling company. So since the 1930s, Gallup's been doing public opinion polling. And like many of you out there in your own businesses, I was actually spent the first 10 years out of college in the nonprofit sector, worked in 2 different faith-based organizations. And we were passionate about, even in the nonprofit world, about developing leaders. Gallup's Clifton Strengths Assessment used to be called Strength Finder. You mentioned that, Phil. Was a tool I started using for myself, for others, and just loved it. Fell in love with the tool. And then Gallup also has, I'll still to this day, after my 2 decades at Gallup and launching my own business with my son, I'm still a huge Gallup fan. Love what they do. Have the ability to still serve as a senior advisor for them with some key clients. But their data is, to me, best in the world, and even they've partnered with Harvard and others around a human flourishing study and all these other data points. One of their big findings, and this came out about 4 decades ago now, but was around workplace engagement. And so everything you're talking about that we've kind of, with Recreate Work, we just kind of said, hey, if you use the Gallup data that for most people, and the Gallup data says about 2 in 10 people on the planet are what they would call engaged in their job. We just translate it as to there's 2 in 10 people that love what they do. That means there's another 80% that really feel like work sucks. And if you ask them why it sucks, they would say the culture sucks, and then they would blame leaders. And so at Recreate Work, we really believe that leaders don't have to be the problem, they can be the solution. And so much of that, as you just said, Phil, stems from almost 100 years of Gallup research of uncovering what makes not only business tick, but Gallup's got great studies on humans and what makes humans tick, what makes humans flourish. So, so much of it it integrates that way. Yeah.
Well, let's go right there to the study on 80% of people say that work sucks and 2 in 10 are engaged. And I want to ask this from 2 perspectives. One,
and again, that's the Jeremy language, not the Gallup poll language. But yeah.
We're allowed to asterisk this all over the place. Jeremy,
absolutely.
But, one perspective is I'm leading a team in some way.
Yeah.
And, 80% of my team is disengaged. Yeah. If I lead 5 people, 4 are disengaged in some form, right? There's levels of disengagement too. But 80% of them are disengaged, or so that's the first way I want to ask the question. The second one is, am I disengaged myself, and what do I do about it? So help me think through the leadership one first, then we'll go to, are you disengaged?
Yep. So the leadership piece, and I'll give a little bit of a good news story. Phil, I know you and I are both based in Ohio. So the when you think about it in the U.S., even or businesses that are U.S. based, when we talk about engagement, Gallup is able to report it globally. So if you go to Gallup.com, you can even see different engagement scores around the world. In the U.S., it jumps. So if we again look at that, was it 20% engaged and then 80%? And I'm calling it not. There's actually two buckets, which I'll touch on in a second. But that 20% number actually grows in the U.S. to just over 30%. So good news is, hey, Phil, you're running your real estate business or other things you're doing. It's probably 3 in 10. So good news story is it's a little bit better. You and I are both hearing, and I'm already seeing your head shake. That's still not good enough. There's 7 in 10 that aren't engaged. And the buckets that Gallup then puts those other 7 in the U.S. is either they're not engaged, meaning they're just punch in, punch out, go home. I often say they're showing up with their hands, but not their hearts and their minds. So, hey, Phil, you told me to be here at 9. I was here at 9. And you're like, I know, but right, they're just not giving you their effort and their energy. The other bucket, though, and you use this language of Gallup actually says actively disengaged. So there's about 2 in 10 people, both in the U.S. and globally, that are actively disengaged, meaning they hate coming to work. They're frustrated. They're actually your detractors. They're people that Gallup has done enough research to find if you actually paid them to stay home, you would be more productive because they're going to take away from energy, customer intersection, all those things. So that's just the reality of when you and I step back. Now, Gallup has found it doesn't have to be that way. If you truly measure it, drive it, which Gallup, again, their Gallup Q12 survey, I think is the best on the planet for engagement. But it's like you measure that, you drive that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, and this is where, again, my focus on leaders and culture, if leaders aren't changing the way that they lead and the way that they live, then so what? And so it is great for you and I, for other leaders that are listening, to say, hey, where's my team at? And then I think you're asking a really good question, because it's what can I do about it? But there is also a what can we do about it? As a team, what can we do? And then I think where you were going is it has to start with hold the mirror up to myself, or as they say on the airplane, secure your own mask first before helping others, right? So it's got to start with, am I engaged? Because if I'm not, then why would I expect the people that work for me and the people that work for them to be engaged?
Yep. So, okay, so first of all, and I'm sure that 2 of 10, so the 2 of 10 actively disengaged, but I'm sure that doesn't apply to anybody listening, any of their teams. It's only those other companies.
Somebody
but
else, yeah.
Just in case it applies to anyone,
Yeah.
and what are the key differences in a company that has a high engagement score versus a low engagement score? I mean, you talked about leadership as the driver, but help me understand that a little bit more. What about leadership? What do I do? What creates the engagement for my company or my team?
Yeah. So 2 things I'll touch on, again, some Gallup research pieces of this, and then I'll just give you some other leadership insights that I found in my own discovery of what works, what doesn't. And again, you see this with leaders all over the place too. But it's Gallup has broken down what they call the elements of engagement. There's 12 core elements. You can Google search it. They've got a couple great books. It's the Manager, First Break All the Rules. There's one just called 12, The Elements of Great Managing. All of those touch on these 12 things. The 12 things, interestingly enough, Phil, are things like, do you know what's expected of you at work? Do you have the materials to do your job? Some is just basic blocking and tackling of if there's not clarity on what you're asking me to do and how you're going to hold me accountable in 6 months or 12 months, that's going to create frustration, or in Gallup's language, lack of engagement, right? So the first thing is just paying attention to those 12 elements. There's things like mission. There's things like friendship and camaraderie. So all of those factors really they're things that as managers you can pay attention to. The reason we say specifically, you can blame leaders for culture, or as leaders we can be the solution to it, is I think, again, the most powerful thing, and I've seen CEOs do this, you should go drive engagement. But if they're not living it out themselves, if they're not paying attention to it, if they're not bought into the mission, if they don't feel cared about and valued, if they don't feel recognized. So it is interesting. I actually had one of my former colleagues at Gallup, Dr. Brian Brim. He actually set it up this way too, where he said, it's not a formalized Gallup study, but he in one of the sessions he and I were co-leading, he just said, just think about it for yourself. Don't think about it for the organization or the team, but how are you feeling about these things? And I do think there's a personal engagement component that if I'm super frustrated, and especially if I'm mid-level manager or I'm a couple layers down from C-suite, if I'm disconnected with the mission, if I'm not feeling like I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. Again, Gallup's got those 12 core elements you can dive into. It's going to be really hard for me to allow that to that energy, that excitement that I refer to it often in my own work as aliveness. There's a gentleman I met years ago who's passed away now, but Dr. Chip Anderson taught at Azusa Pacific University and was a close friend of Dr. Clifton, who invented the Clifton Strengths Assessment. But they created some education resources around Clifton Strengths decades ago. But Chip Anderson would call it aliveness. And I had the chance to interact with him about 4 months before he passed. And he just said, like, you can look at a human and quickly identify how alive are they or not. Are they just lukewarm, going through the motions? Are they totally checked out, right? You can tell when friends come over and you're like, something's up with Phil, or, and then you can tell when you're like, dude, there's something about that person. I remember being with my wife and daughter. My daughter's not 23, but she was up in Cleveland last summer, and we were at a downtown Cleveland, this movie night, and the food trucks and kind of cool setup. And lines are super long. It's hot. People are grumpy. And I remember saying to the food truck guys, just busted him, like, hey, man, thank you so much. And I go, hey, how is your day going? I'm just treating him like a human. And he goes, hey, dude, I love your energy. He was talking about my engagement. He was talking about just my engagement for life. Right. I view everything as a survey. So I was assessing his team and how he is leading his team. But, whether you call it energy, whether you call it aliveness, whether you call it engagement, I think there's a huge element that people in the organization are looking to us as leaders for. Do you care? Are you bought in? Do you have a deep belief in the mission and the value of what we're up to?
Right. I think this is a perfect segue to are you and what if I'm not? But before I go there, I just want to add to, like, I love the word aliveness and energy. One of our core values is positive attitude and energy. But I created it because one of the guys on our team, so Randy, he brings so much energy, so much aliveness. It's really just natural, like, to life, but also to work, right? And it's so, it's caught. So the other thing I wrote down is it's caught, not taught. So just like anything with our kids, we can preach to them all day, but if we go do as I say, not as I do, right? But if you do that, it doesn't work very well.
No.
Same at work, right? So things are caught by the leader, not taught. But what if, whether I'm a leader or not in my business, or by the way, let me say something else. If you're not a leader, you are, because you're leading by example, whether you have the title or not. So, like, Randy works on our team. He brings me energy. He is leading me. He's leading the way with energy in the organization that impacts me, right? So no matter what your title, or, like, forget about your title or your role, you're having an impact on the aliveness, on the energy of the organization. But let's just say, okay, but I'm listening to this, and maybe I've been in business for 20 years, and, like, there's a little bit of burnout. Like, I just don't bring the energy and aliveness that I used to. Or I'm running this team, but I'm not connected to the company's big mission. Or, there's these different reasons for disconnectedness or lack of aliveness. So talk to the listener specifically if they're feeling this, if they're not feeling energized and alive with what they're doing. What can I do about it?
Yeah. So and I'll credit Gallup on this too, and it's actually an individual from Gallup, but Tom Rath, who's actually one of the grandsons of Dr. Clifton. So again, Dr. Clifton passed away, but he's who the company rebranded Clifton or Strength Finder as Clifton Strengths in Dr. Clifton's honor. But Tom Rath is one of Dr. Clifton's grandsons, co-authored a bunch of books when he was at Gallup, and then left Gallup, continues to write and speak and just have a passion around all this research. But one of the books that Tom wrote is simply called Fully Charged. He's talking about engagement. He's just talking about it in like everyday terms. And I think of like, I'll grab my phone here, Phil. I had it set aside. But if I grab my phone, you and I, we go through our day, man. And if it's getting down, we're like, I got to plug this sucker in. As humans, I think we're like, I'm good. I'm just going to keep going. I'm good. I don't need sleep. There's almost like a bragging point sometimes as leaders. Oh, I was working all weekend. There's some old, and you and I have talked about personal faith and some of that stuff too. But man, you got thousands of years ago, and people of any faith, even my Jewish friends, when they talk about Sabbath and Shabbat and peace, and you're like, to Sabbath just means to pause, to cease, to stop. And unless we stop and plug in, and again, your source of energy for somebody might be time with their family or time outside or reading or, whatever. But it's like time of meditation. And like, you're like, unless we plug into something that re-energizes us, and I would say daily, but especially weekly, I think there's disservice for us as leaders when they're like, I haven't used my vacation in 5 years. You're like, okay. But I don't know. To me, success is not just how much money you've made, but yet you're on your 8th marriage and you're like whatever. It's like when people are like, no, I wish I did some things differently. It starts with this whole idea of, are you fully charged? Are you plugged in? Are you connected to things that bring life? And that's what's really interesting too, man, is in the workplace, when you've got a manager that loves what they do and they love why they do it and the people they do it for, like as part of Recreate, we talk about 3 elements of leadership are listen, love, and liberate. And so when you actually tap into that yourself as a leader, you sort of listen to what is it that drives me, creates me. How do I listen to others versus just bark orders at others? Do I love, am I passionate about what I do? Do I put others in roles where they love what they do? And then ultimately, do I love who I do it with? And, that whole piece of when you see that creates aliveness, that creates life, that creates something that even in Gallup's research on followership, like what creates a leader that people want to follow? Gallup did a study in 2008 that was published in a book called Strength-Based Leadership, that Tom Rathway mentioned, and another former Gallup consultant, researcher, Barry Conchie, they co-wrote that and kind of shared some thoughts. And again, any book that Gallup writes is tons of Gallup research. Those guys got to put their names on it. But it's like there's elements where they were talking about just this whole idea of if you want to be a strong leader, a strength-based leader, there's a whole section on followers' needs. So what is it that we need to do as leaders? And Gallup just redid that study just last year of like, hey, are the needs the same? 2008 to 2025, it's now 2026. They're like, things have shifted. Those 4 needs: trust, compassion, stability, and hope. And again, you can Google Gallup needs of followers, but trust. So do I trust that person? Compassion, do they actually care? Stability, so there's going to be bumps on the plane, but are we going to get through it? Or do we just create fear? Your job may not be here. You're like, people want stability. And then hope. Are we creating a vision for tomorrow that's better than the vision for today? And so it's a little bit of like I believe that when we are fully charged, when we're plugged in, when we're fully alive, we have the capacity to actually allow followers to feel that. And when we don't, they're not going to feel that because we're living in fear and we're living in emptiness and all those other things.
How much does the professional, so we're talking from a leadership lens. A lot of us think about that from a professional perspective. Clearly, leadership applies to every single area of life, right?
Sure.
In the family, in your community, if you're coaching kids on a team, your faith, whatever it might be. But how much does this topic of alignment, you talked about the Sabbath, just resting, recharging, but how much of your daily habits, you said that too, personal life carry over to the aliveness in your professional life? Like how much connection is there?
Yeah. I remember hearing, I think it was Dr. Jim Harder, Gallup's chief scientist. He, one of the studies that he helped lead at Gallup was around well-being. So like call it. He and I actually were stuck in customs once going into Canada, which you think as neighbors, I'm like, we'd be the easiest country to get into, but I can walk into lots of other countries in the Middle East way easier than I can get into Canada. But they wanted to know, like, what are we doing there? Are we selling services? Did we buy a work visa or not? And he was explaining well-being to the border patrol people, and he was going into depth of, like, we study 8 billion people on the planet, and he was giving a research or answer. And I said, the guy's like, I don't understand. And I go, it's happiness. We study happiness. And Jim's looking at me because he's like, that's not really what. And I'm like, and the guy's like, oh, okay, cool. You guys can get through, because we were just there to speak to a client, talk about it. But his research around well-being where it was, and he's absolutely right. It's more than just human happiness. And Arthur Brooks, by the way, is a Gallup senior advisor or senior scientist, Harvard professor, written a bunch of cool books. I think you and I talked about him last time. He integrates faith to a lot of stuff he does as well. He actually studies happiness. Like, that is his whole thing. The Gallup study on well-being, and they've actually even recently partnered with Harvard and Baylor on a study around what they call human flourishing. It takes the 5 elements of well-being. So a person that on the planet, and again, you can go to gallup.com and see their research. It looks at, what's your physical well-being, what's your financial well-being, what's your social well-being, right? So like relationships in your life. What's your community well-being? Like, do you actually feel safe where you live, and do you like where you live? And again, post-COVID, a lot of people can move to the cities they want to live in, or city where their dollar can go a little further. So all those factors are great. And then career well-being, the 5th one, which gets back to engagement and what you do. And for us as leaders, the environment you create, people are going to spend more time at work than they will at home. So in their adult life, and again, take out sleeping, which again, some of us were like, I don't sleep that much anyways. But take out sleeping, you're going to spend more time at work. It's something like 60,000 plus of your adult awake hours at work. So when you think about that, kind of full circle to that sense of, when people talk about work-life balance, what I remember recalling hearing Dr. Jim Harder say is he's like, it's less work-life balance and it's got to be more work-life integration. And I use that language a lot with people, because when you're trying to balance these two things, you're like, you're never going to balance, but family is so important. You're like, yes, family, for me, it's, aside from my faith, like my family is one of the most important things in my life. My job, my career, like what I do, I'm passionate about it. I love it. I would do it 23 hours a day if I could and it was healthy, But by the way, I'm actually less productive if I'm working 23 hours a day than if I'm working 12 hours a day. So when I begin to think about these two things and think about it from that language of integration, it's, do I work somewhere? So I can even say my years at Gallup, I was fortunate or blessed to always have leaders or managers that valued my family. They'd say, hey man, this is your daughter's graduation. You are not traveling that week. You got to be there. I even had a client that was like, hey, if we need to put you on the private jet to get you to that event, Gallup's legal team, of course, was like, no, we don't do private jets. We don't, I was like, they're sending me. It's their dollar, not, But it was my point on that, Phil, is like, even my clients knew that was important to me, and they were valuing, hey, you do both of these things well. Jeremy, you be a great dad and a great husband and be involved in your family and your community. And do your career well. And I think when we try to separate those, or you even hear people say, I love work, but then I go home and I'm miserable, or the opposite. I love my weekends, but Mondays are the number 1 days of the week that heart attacks happen. There's a reason why, because people come back to work and they have to be in meetings with us leaders that are listening, and we're zapping the life out of them instead of breathing the life into them. And I think that's where, when we say, hey, we want you to be happy and healthy at work, because we want you to go home happy and healthy, and then come back to work with an energy. There should be again, our whole thing of recreate work. Recreate or recreate means, what do you do for fun or recreation? Webster would define it as to make new again. And we're like, sometimes you love your job. You're 2 weeks in, you're like, this is the best place to work. And 10 years in, you're like, it's rinse and repeat and I'm bored. And we're like, and leaders are the ones who can breathe that life and that energy and that recreation into the workplace that sends people home happy and healthy. And then you have that work-life integration. And by the way, my family cares about my work just as much as my work people care about my family. So that's part of that. Go ahead.
No, I just think it is so integrated. It is so connected. And if you think about, if you're if you're energized by what you're doing, if you're feeling alive by what you're doing, you're going to go home. And not to say you never have a bad day. Like, we're not saying that. Like, you're not, but if you're energized in general, if you're alive in general, if you're purposeful at work in general, you're going to go home and that's going to be felt. If you're constantly stressed, disengaged, not energized, not feeling alive at work, that's going to carry over. Like, they're very much integrated. Similarly, like, because it's an easy analogy, health, if you're saying balance, so I don't have time to work out in the morning because I have to rush to work.
Yep.
That's the time you are not going to be as good of an employee at work if you don't get your sleep or work out in the morning or eat healthy. Like, these things are so connected. And honestly, your faith and knowing what you can control, what you can disconnect and let go of, right? There's so many connections here and integration. I think it's so important. And I think as leaders, we sometimes it's hard, I think, for I think we can say we just need time. Like, we need more time from our employees. Like, that's what's going to get the biggest bang for our buck, if you will. Yep. And we have to avoid that. I think, I don't want to say natural tendency or urge, but we have to avoid that because we have to prioritize every area of life ourselves. And as you said earlier, caught, not taught, but also we have to make sure we are helping and ensuring our employees are prioritizing those areas of life. Like, if we see employees not doing that, we shouldn't be cheering that we get more of their time and attention. We actually should be doing the opposite and saying, hold on a minute, you have to help. Like, we have to get, I think there should be a system where we're helping them get more engaged in their faith, in their health, in their family. Like, if we're doing that for employees, they're going to be that much more alive at work than if we're not doing that. And that's what I'm trying to do. You're trying to do that with Recreate. Like, we're trying to bring this awareness to leadership teams, to leaders and organizations that have the influence. Like, if you're listening to this, you have an influence on people that you work with, certainly at home, but you can be an example, and you don't have to push this stuff either. There's a lot of different ways to do this. So I want to come back to the, I guess, leadership. You said it, but you kind of listen, love, liberate.
Yeah.
You talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. That's your model, right? So tell us more about that.
It's kind of our model. It's not, these aren't things that in 2026 or 2025, when we launch the business, that we're like, we invented something new. It's almost like if you're a musician, which I'm not. I used to play guitar years ago, but I would not call myself a musician, nor do my kids. Kids call me that. But you're like, there's only so many notes you can play around with. And what's interesting, and I love Gallup's research, because when it breaks into the basics of humanity, of what is it that allows people to be engaged, or again, in our language, or Chip Anderson's language of aliveness, you're like, so much of it. And, Gallup, I think, first published it in 1999 in a book called First Break All the Rules, which, again, Gallup's a nearly 100-year-old polling company. They didn't know they were going to publish a New York Times best-selling book, and that was the first of, I think, 14 or 15 or something. I don't know how many books are out now, but it's that in that book, First Break All the Rules, they talk about what great managers, people managers, do differently. And they broke down these 12 elements, but they use that data point that you've heard it and seen, tweets about it, but it's people join companies, but they leave managers. And so you're like, I get to work for Apple, great. But you're like, but if I work for Steve and he's a complete jerk, you're like, okay. But there's a component of that goes back to this whole idea of, am I examining the way that I lead as an individual? And by the way, I do think, the majority of the work that we're doing with Recreate Work targets C-suite executives and then their direct reports. And again, sometimes they'll do an offsite or, hey, come in and speak at the company meet. You're like, great. But going to the spa once a year doesn't make me healthy. So our whole thing is, whether it's through coaching or whether it's through quarterly time with a leadership team, that sort of commitment to personal development, that commitment to self and others, oxygen mask on me and my team, that's where we see leaders grow. And Gallup's chairman, Jim Clifton, said this years ago, but he's like, I believe everybody needs a coach. And of course, people would be like, well, yeah, of course Gallup thinks that because they have these coaching tools. But I agree with Jim. I've yet to see an Olympic athlete that doesn't have a coach. So if you watch the Olympics a few months back, like you don't see one that just like Michael Phelps didn't show up, to the Olympics X number of times, be like, nope, I'm good now. I got this. Or professional golfers, they have multiple coaches. They got a putting coach and a nutrition coach. So like professionals are committed to personal development and growth. And I think that's the piece that as leaders, when you think about, well, what is it? Like, it's not just, I need this team needs help or this person needs help. You're like, they might, but if you really want to take things up a notch, if you want to move, there's a book out there, Beyond High Performance, written by Jason Jaggard, who I knew years ago. We actually connected through a faith-based community out in Los Angeles. But that's Jason's book, Beyond High Performance, and kind of this whole idea of how do you move people, not just good to great, but even to that next level. And so much of it is around this whole idea of we've got to examine ourselves as leaders. And so these three, I'll call them simple but profound kind of ahas for me as a leader are listen, love, liberate. Am I listening to others first? Gallup's got great research on be less boss, more coach. So don't be the boss, the bully. I don't know about you, man, but like when I go, because I said so, even with my kids, because I said so, they'll do it, but they're not motivated to do it. And as I get older, man, it's like, I don't want to be told what to do. So even if my wife...
By the way, humans are humans. And if I tell my 6-year-old or 8-year-old, they definitely don't listen. And if I tell a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old, they definitely don't listen, but they might know how to act like they listen. That's the only difference. Is the 8-year-old probably like just doesn't know how to trick me. But yeah, humans are humans, and they don't want to be told how to do things.
Yeah. So it's like, just if you flip it to a question, not like, Phil, why are you so mad? But if I'm like, hey man, are you doing okay? Or like, what's up? Like if we flip it to a question as leaders, and by the way, Gallup knows this with polling in any polling organization, Barna or whoever else, just because the data says it doesn't mean you do it. So if my kids were little and I polled them on what do you want for dinner and they say chocolate cake, doesn't mean I give them chocolate cake. Right. But by listening first, I now know, shoot, they didn't say chicken or burgers, or they didn't say any of the options we have. They said something different. When you're aware of where people are at and they feel heard and understood, I use the language a lot one-on-one with leaders, but people want to feel seen, heard, and valued. Doesn't mean you agree with them, but it's that whole listen to understand, not to agree. So you're like, hey man, that makes sense. Even by the way, in politics, you're like, oh, you voted for them? Oh, that's interesting. Why? Okay. Oh, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Doesn't be like, I agree with you. But right. Instead of turning it into instant debate, or you're wrong, especially in the context of the workplace, the manager, but I am right because I said so, because I'm a leader. So when we start with listening, there's just power to it.
I don't think you're recommending use politics as the example to figure out your listening skills either, though. So I'll add that to it. But listen, love, liberate. Talk about liberate a little bit, because I think that could be taken in a couple of different directions. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So I'll flip it just to simply the word freedom. And you and I were talking about this when you asked about launching my business. I know when you and I first met, you were doing leadership development in a large, corporation, and you were doing great at it. I know your boss did not want you to leave. We talked about it after you, but you just felt called to like, hey man, you were already dabbling in real estate. Is there something there, working on your purpose matrix stuff? And it's like, there's a sense of when you go in any organization, if I'm moving from job A to job B, even within the same organization, does it give me more freedom? And I ask leaders this question all the time. I say, imagine, this freedom scale in front of you where 10 is absolute freedom in life. You got financial freedom, all of it, like whatever you define it, but absolute tremendous freedom. And a 1 is no freedom at all. It's probably you're in solitary confinement in a high security prison. So like you got nothing, right? There's no recess time but it's interesting when I ask leaders that question and I'm like, current state, where are you at? Or in your current role, where are you at? Even if they're a 7, you're like, okay, what would make it an 8? And I know even for me, like I wanted to write and speak and do some things that needed to happen differently than in the context of the parameters that I currently had. So some of that you're like, okay, that's not a bad thing, because I was at Gallup 20 plus years because of the freedoms that they gave me. But when there's opportunity to say, what does that look like? What I think happens into an extreme, I'm talking more like fueling now my own entrepreneurial desires and some of that not everybody has, and not everybody needs to leave their organization or quit a job or change a job. But I think there's times where we don't feel free to be ourselves, bring our best self to work, bring our whole self to work. You feel like you got to act a certain way. You see this all the time too, Phil. Like, oh, the big boss is here today. So did I strategically dress different? Like, did I put on different clothes? Did I? And by the way, maybe it's the way you should dress every day. But you're like, but we talk different. There's a lack of authenticity. And recently met this guy Dan Olabi, who wrote a book, Authentic Leadership, and just the whole thing is like, man, be who you are. Like, have the freedom to be who you are. Great leaders create environments. Again, listen, love, liberate, which we skip love. That's okay. But when you're listening to who people are, and then you get out of their way, and we exist as leaders to say, hey, Phil, how can I help you be successful? Because by the way, if I'm your leader, whether I'm your manager, whether I'm the CEO, I want you to be successful. I want you to be more successful than you were before. So it's not do this, and you're not just my peon to get it done for me. Yes, there's things that we want you to get done. That's why we're paying you and hired you and you have a job. But when I give you the freedom to say, Phil, what else do you want to do? What else do you dream about? One of my best managers, we call them go-tos at Gallup, but one of my best go-tos we'd have a monthly check-in. He'd go, hey man, what are you loving about your work? Right? What's getting in the way? And those are two simple questions that he was just basically asking me indirectly about freedom. Do I have the freedom to do what I love? Am I giving you autonomy to do it? Am I involving you in innovation to do it? And I think what great organizations do, and there's lots of examples of these, Amazon's one where they're like, we're not making every decision at the top. We're empowering people to do it. And by the way, Amazon's a great example too of listening. Jeff Bezos even says leaders speak last. So I was with an Amazon AWS leader, and she was new, and I forgot about that philosophy of Bezos, but she didn't say anything. And I'm like, man, she is way too introverted, quiet. She's not going to lead this team, man. They were going to run circles around her. And there was just like the opening 10 minutes, and I was sitting with them to then lead a session. And when we got around, she goes, you guys, that was killing me, because I know Jeff is all about leaders speak last, but she goes, I wanted to say, Phil, that's great. But then would all of you change your answers to Phil's? So she's like, she was listening. And it's like listening then created that sense of freedom, autonomy, the ability to be liberated, free, fully alive. And I think that goes back to our work-life integration. When you're free at work, I think you have more freedom at home. When you're free to bring your best self to work, you don't have to pretend. You can be a nerdy who you are. You can be the super overly relational person. Like, we say it all the time, you do you, but then we're like, no, don't do it that way. Yeah.
Honestly, about the time we were working together, and this isn't anything about me, my role, my leadership, but, before, let's say 2018, 2019,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure of my end state career path and the direction I was going. And I wasn't trying to climb the corporate ladder. Like, that was never a goal of mine, but maybe it was in the back of my mind, like, will I be in these different roles or whatever? When I knew I was going down the path of real estate for sure, like, okay, this is happening.
Yep.
I became a better, more effective leader at work because I was more authentic. I didn't really care. I'm not saying go be a cowboy, but maybe I am. Like, go be a cowboy at work and do it in the right way. Like, lead with questions, lead with curiosity, ask a lot of questions, including of your superiors. Like, hey, what if we did things like this? I don't know if I agree with this approach to this challenge. I would maybe think about doing it this way. What do you think? When you start to be just say what you think and be, again, don't be a total cowboy. But when I started to be more authentic and I didn't care at all, truly at all about titles or roles or politics or any of that, I started to, I think, gain more leadership authority, not because I was looking for it, because I was just being more authentically who I was. Because I wasn't, in that case, the lesson would be, I wasn't given all the freedom, or maybe I was, but I wasn't assuming I had it.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I have it now. I'm going to take it. And I have that freedom to speak my mind, to be authentically myself. And as a result, it was good for the company, right? It was good for the company. So
yeah, again, having worked with your leader at that time, and again, these were conversations that happened behind closed doors after you left, as we talked about you. But
oh boy, here we go.
it was like, dude, I love that guy. Like, we're gonna, like, because you were leading, not because you're waiting for somebody to give you a title. Even in the world, by the way, and you know, the L'Oreals of the world and others that I've had the chance to work with, like, they've deeply integrated psychological safety into the DNA of who they are. Now, when you think about what is psychological safety, it's the freedom to be who I am, the freedom to challenge a senior leader without, that's insubordination. It doesn't mean, when you're saying being a cowboy, I'm like, that doesn't mean being an asshole and like, shut up.
Yeah.
You're like, no, that's insubordinate. That's disrespectful. That's not.
I'm not saying I was never that, by the way, Jeremy.
Right,
I also
exactly.
might have been called that a couple times.
You can interview plenty of people I worked with and be like, you know. But the reality is, when you have even like little L leadership, the ability to speak up, and all we're talking about here is under this Liberate piece, but free to be who you are, free to disagree, free to say, can I challenge that? You do it in a respectful way. It's actually what makes the organization better, and it's a type of organization people want to be a part of. People don't want to be robots. In a world of AI, and I know you're going to a conference, I think you said later today or tomorrow, and you're like AI is incredible. Like, it's accelerating so much of the things we do. It's going to help edit. I don't know if it's going to help edit or you got somebody to help edit this afterwards, but you're like, there's so many cool things. But in a world like we have robots that will help us, we don't need humans that show up like robots. And so Gallup's whole not engaged or actively I'm like, even the actively disengaged are at least passionate, but they are insubordinate and they probably need to move on or get back on board. But the not engaged, they just become robots. You punch in, you punch out. I think on our website we say we don't need more robots and zombies. We need.
I think without going down the rabbit hole of AI, leadership and interpersonal skills are going to be that much more important as the differentiator, because everyone has AI. So what's going to differentiate you? It's absolutely going to be leadership. Leadership has always been a differentiator. I think it's going to be even more of a differentiator. So if you're thinking I can just use AI and I don't have to worry about this other stuff, I think you were flat wrong. AI will do the technical skill depth, but leadership is going to be the differentiator that sets sets businesses apart, I'll say. So I want to add a couple of other things that because you talked about, first of all, coaching, like the power of associations in peer groups, accountability groups, but coaching. Yeah. So I've used coaches in like just kind of a personal coach. I've used a health coach. I've had career coaches. I have an accountability group. Here's what I would say, because I think coaches are expensive. That's what's the incident. Like, coaches are expensive. And I think the question for me would be, how expensive would not having certain coaches that I've had have been? And like an easy example of this, because again, I talked about health, but people can connect to it, is if you have a health coach that teaches you things that you can apply for the next 50 years, the amount of money you're going to save between, let's say, age 70 and 80 on healthcare because you hired a coach for 1 year right now is probably going to be like your earning years, your healthcare costs, all that stuff. Like it's so valuable. But the amount, like one coach for business and the impact it can have, the cost of a lost employee, the cost of hiring, like don't be afraid to pay for some coaching is what I'd say. And that's, to me, I've applied it also to different areas of life. So I just wanted to add that I think it's so powerful. Yep. And then the last thing I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit is, because you brought it up and we've talked about it some ourselves, but the power of asking questions. And if you go back to like the best leader that did this was 2,000 years ago, right? So talk about, and you brought up faith integration a little bit. Like, where are we in 2026? Is this okay? How should companies think about this? Is this, we should be doing more of this, less? I'm talking to the person, the faith-based person that maybe is debating even, are these things allowed to be mixed? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's, again, the quick answer on it is, if we're bringing our authentic full self to work and faith is a part of my life, like I think I would say most people I worked with at Gallup for 2 decades knew that faith was an important part of my life. My wife and I were involved in our local church, some other things like that. I spent some time in the nonprofit sector, faith-based sector before I joined Gallup. But it didn't need to be like Jeremy's the weird dude that's always trying to tell us we're right or wrong. it's an important part of me, but I'm like, if I value bringing my full self to work, then I should value people that are different than me or believe different than me or don't believe anything, and that's okay too. The one thing I think is just really interesting is, and you can again Google search Gallup's latest data on this. I think I found one earlier today when you and I were talking about, like, are there 80% of people in the U.S. that still would say they believe in God? That's gone down a little bit from the 80s where it was like 95% or something, but you're like 8 in 10 people still believe in God. There's other research out there. I referenced Gallup's human flourishing study that they did with Harvard and Baylor, but they actually add an element on this whole well-being and happiness and quality of life. They add an element on character, virtues, and even religion. So they're not saying what religion, but they'll ask questions like, do you attend a weekly gathering? So whether you're going to your, temple or synagogue or mosque or, Catholic cathedral or whatever, whatever it is. It's like, are you attending something? And I'll even add this element with other humans. What's interesting is you actually see that overall human flourishing, the data on that positively correlates to people that are part of some kind of faith-based community. So what's interesting with that is, if there's good in that, so if we're like, drink more water, we're not afraid to talk about it. If there's good in people having some kind of faith, why wouldn't we want to talk about it? The other thing is, if 80+% of people believe in it, we've made it like, don't talk about it at all, save it for outside. And we scratched on, you're like, with things of life and things that matter, it's less, I think we need to make it less about debate. There was a recent article that Gallup's chairman sent through, I think it was on Axiom, but it was basically about, the news and social media makes it seem like even here in the US, we're a country divided and the political, but we're like, the majority of us like aren't posting political stuff on social media. We're posting pictures of our kids or our cats or whatever. And so when you actually, the headline was, listen less to the news and listen more to your neighbors. Like when I'm talking to my neighbors, even if I know they vote different than me, even if I know they worship different than me, they're actually good people that will be like, hey man, we brought your trash can in when you guys were out of town last week. Or hey, we heard your mother-in-law passed and we want to make you a meal. Like humans, when they actually are together and we treat others with, and again, go back to some of those, like you said, 2,000-year-old faith-based principles of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. I know you talk a lot about peace and shalom and even some elements of that. What is that? There's not a human out there in the world where mental health and depression and suicide and loneliness is at an all-time high. I'm like, we should be talking more about peace. And people want that. They crave that. My brother-in-law manages Noah Khan, who's an artist that you probably know of, but Noah's even got a documentary coming out talking about his mental health. And it's like people are advocates for, what do we do for more peace and inner peace in my life? And for me, I'm like, man, that has been, my faith is what grounds me in that. And so I do think there's a place, and should be a place, if you're a leader in business, that your faith is an important part of your story. How do you integrate that? Not in a way where we need to put the 10 commandments on the wall, or you need to be like, you believe this or you're out. You're like, Jesus, which is, the God I believe in, you're like, he hung out with the people who thought most different from him. He didn't hang out with the religious people. So I think that's where we're like, hey, tell me. And by the way, I looked it up the other day. It's like Jesus asked over 300, it's like 200 debated, depending on what translation you're looking at, but like between 220 and 380 questions that he asked. Do you want to get well? What do you want? Who says that? So all of those things, when you think about listening, loving, liberating, you're like, to me, that's ways that if you are a person of faith, how do you integrate that? And if you're not a person of faith, I'm like, I think the world is better when we treat people with kindness, and we treat people when you're passionate about something and you help others to treat each other with love and respect. So,
well, I think, first of all, I think for you individually, the Human Flourishing and Happiness study says that if you practice faith, you're going to be happier.
Yeah. That's
by the way, I think the statistic that I think 80% of people believing in God is staggering for two reasons. One, you showed me the actual chart before this call in the drop over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
And I think the drop is staggering. I would also say that if you looked at society and the news today, you would think that number is actually way less than 80%.
Correct.
So 80% is a staggeringly high number, depending on what lens you look at it.
Yep.
Nonetheless, I think it ties back to, from a workplace perspective, I guess how I think about it is our job as leaders is to allow, like, if I summarize this discussion, allow people to liberate them, allow them to be free, allow them to be their authentic self. And from a faith perspective, what does that mean for them, right? If it means nothing to them, allow them to be that. If they want more, if they want to have conversations, not preaching, not posting the 10 commandments, unless that's what you want to do, by the way.
Right.
Your business, you can do that too. But
those are your company values.
Let them be their authentic self as people of faith, fathers, mothers, husbands, wives, whatever it might be, members of the community. They're help them become the best version of themselves holistically, right?
Yep.
That's what, the purpose matrix, how do we help people become the best version of themselves holistically, every area of life? That's what we're trying to do. And I think if you can do that, you can have peace, you can become content with who you are and who you are becoming. So riff over, but I think there's so many different approaches, and there's not a right or wrong way for faith integration into your business. It can be just use the values you've learned in your faith and apply them. Or it can be, we are a faith-based company and we are going to do this, right? And everything in between. It's okay. Like what fits you, what's authentically, what allows you to be your authentic self and bring that to your business, to your team.
Yep. Yeah, that's well said.
Awesome. Jeremy, what are you, if you think about Recreate, what are you just most excited about right now?
Gosh, man, we're just excited. I mean, our mission is pretty simple, of inspiring leaders to transform culture. And I think that there are leaders out there that are tired, that are challenged, that just can't figure it out. There's pressures of growth, which, by the way, that's okay too. I'm like, there's a passage in the scriptures that says a tree is known by its fruit, and if it's not producing anything, you chop that tree down, turn it into firewood. So I'm like, productivity is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. But how are we flourishing and growing? And so the thing I'm most excited about, Phil, is just breathing life into leaders, letting them know, again, that connection to people. The studies on loneliness, and I reference anxiety, depression, all those things that are an all-time high. Even in a world where social media, we should be more connected to people. We're not. We're alone. We're isolated. And so it just excites me to actually, that word develop means to pull out of, not to put into. And so, the great artist Michelangelo even said, like, whatever statue he was creating, whether it's an angel or a statue of David, like, it's already in the rock. You just have to chisel away the imperfections. And so the thing I'm most passionate about is helping leaders to do that work, to just chisel away the stuff, to unlock the best version of themselves, and then to truly just create a culture where they do that for others. That to me is seeing organizations where humans flourish and are alive, and you're like, dude, that's a better place to live. And thinking about doing that for however many days I got left on this planet, it's pretty fun to think about. Just, again, truly inspiring, breathing life into people in a way that they then regenerate that for others. Yeah,
I love this aliveness, breathing life into people. I love that as a mission. Like, I love that so much. So,
and by the way, Phil, it only takes 30 seconds if I were to ask you, and I don't want you to answer, but to think about a leader in your life that did the opposite. We see somebody's car in the parking lot. We're like, oh gosh, I didn't know they were here. Our breath is gone. Our heart rate's up. Because there's too many leaders on the planet that we are taught to be the boss, the bully, to be the jerk. And we we pull the life out of people instead of the opposite. Oh my gosh, Phil's here today. Awesome. like how do we become leaders that truly breathe life? Yeah. So.
I'll go back to the importance of not because of your title. Are you 100%. Giving energy, or are you taking it away?
100%.
Like, at simplest level, are you if you're a peer and you work for a bunch of other people with titles, are you bringing energy to the organization? Or are you sucking it out of the organization, right? And if you're sucking it out of the organization, there's a lot of self-reflection, self-awareness, where you're at. There's a lot of questions you need to ask yourself.
Yep.
But if you can bring energy, there's a ripple effect and a compound effect of that I think is so powerful. And Jeremy, you're doing it. I appreciate this so much. I appreciate this growing relationship. It's kind of neat how this all came together. How can people find out more about Recreate and what you're doing?
Yeah, so simply they can go to the website or on LinkedIn, so recreatework.com, or on LinkedIn. Again, they can find the website or find me, Jeremy Pietrocini, if you can figure out how to spell that last name. But
and
yeah.
who talk to the leader that you're like, who are you targeting? So if business owners, business leaders are listening to this, who do you want to work with?
Predominantly C-suite leaders who are feeling that we need that boost. I think professional athletes that are like, things are good but could be better. Those C-suite leaders that are like, man, I need something for me or for my team. And again, obviously HR, L&D folks are often charged with how do we take our leadership to the next level. So those are predominantly who we're talking to. And again, on the culture front, where are we at? Where do we want to be? And how do we inspire leaders to get there? So anybody that's owning kind of people and culture work within businesses are often friends of Recreate Work. So,
well, you brought the energy and you made me feel alive today, Jeremy. I don't know if that's too like cliche or cheesy, but in all seriousness, if you're a leader that needs to bring some life and some energy into your organization, reach out to Jeremy. Check out recreatework.com. I'll also put that in the show notes. Jeremy, thanks so much. It's been great to reconnect over the last few weeks. For the Purpose Matrix, signing off.